Hello. Hi. My name's Georgina. I'm a designer for projects by IF. Most of my work involves experience design and research. And today I'm going to be talking to you about microinteractions for the system and IF's approach to designing them. At IF, we focus on practical and ethical uses of data that also make sense from a commercial perspective. We answer questions like this. How might we change how tech treats data about people? The reason we want to do this is that we believe caring about people means caring about the data that describes them. We're an independent studio, and we work with businesses and public sector organisations to show how this can be possible in their products and services. 4 years ago, this was big news. The fact that the NSA in the US intercepted and spied on what people were doing online. 2015 was also when Sarah Gold founded IF. I was employee number 1, and we were squatting in someone else's offices trying to convince people that digital rights were important. Fast forward to today, and the discussions around digital platforms and surveillance has become much more widespread. But a bit like how very few people have read all of Zuboff's book, our understanding of how these issues are affecting people is still pretty incomplete. And the same goes for designers and product people. Many of us know that we want to do things differently, but we don't always know how. The reason for this is partly linked to something that Kevin Systrom, who's the founder of Instagram, said about social media. He thought that we're in a pre-Newtonian moment where we all understand that it works, but not how it works. But what Systrom doesn't say is that we had to wait over 1,000 years to go from early gravitational theories from Archimedes until the supposed apple fell on Newton's head. And as Ade, a friend of IF, says, this doesn't remove responsibility. The social costs of waiting 1,000 years are too high. The unintended consequences of new uses of data and emerging technologies are having an impact on people now. But there are also commercial opportunities for businesses and organisations that get this right. And we're in an exciting time, as I've heard others say today as well. We have the power to shape what comes next. And taking this positive approach is part of our practice at IF. And I'll talk through tangible examples of how that works later on. But coming back to what Systrom said, what do you do before you know how everything works? And it feels like all the apples are falling on your head. Normally, as designers, we start with user needs. But the user needs for the problems that we deal with at IF, problems like how does someone exercise their digital rights, don't exist. Other approaches that I've seen to these kinds of challenges are super high-level discussions about AI and ethics, toolkits and principles. Saskia Sasson, who's a sociologist and has spoken about how complex systems change, one of the parts of one of her talks that I saw that I really enjoyed was this moment when she describes how systems change over time through small interactions and not changing everything at once. So far, I've been talking about some pretty abstract ideas, but part of my job is about bringing those abstract ideas to life, often in interfaces. So we're a technology studio with a multidisciplinary team. We have backgrounds in architecture, fashion, humanities, even diamonds on the blockchain. And these different perspectives mean that we ask different kinds of questions. The founder of IF, Sarah, studied architecture. My husband studied architecture, is an architect. I'm surrounded by these people. But what they have shown me is that part of being a good architect means knowing that your client isn't just the person that's paying you to design the building. It's also the people living and working in and around the spaces that you're designing. It's about understanding that you're not designing in isolation. You have to understand the edges of public and private space and how your building connects to the wider network and systems around it. It's about designing for community needs, not just from the perspective of the individual. Over the last 10 years, user needs have become fundamental to design-led approaches to problem solving in tech. There's a lot to recommend for that approach, both practically in terms of usability, but also as a way of building empathy within tech organizations and making sure that people outside of software teams are considered and sometimes included in building products. But we and many others are increasingly seeing that they're not enough for the problems that we design for. This is an ongoing discussion for us. When do we incorporate user needs? And there's a tension because we care about humans, but we don't call ourselves human-centered designers. The reason for this is that our beliefs and values that we bring to every project that we think are critical for building the future that we want to see do not easily translate as user needs. So we believe that people should have agency over data about them. That's not a user need. We believe that organizations should be accountable for the way that they use data. That's also not a user need. We believe there needs to be a balance of power between people and organizations. That's also not a user need. At IF, we look through different perspectives from beyond interfaces to organizations, infrastructures, and the systems that they sit in. I remember seeing this film at design school. And if you were at design school too, as I imagine many of you are, hopefully you're familiar with this film as well. I remember seeing it and being transported. It's called The Powers of 10. It's a film directed by Charles and Ray Eames from about 1977. And it takes you on a journey from deep space through different layers and scales, right down to subatomic atoms. It makes complex and connected systems visible and tangible, which is not that different to the work that I do every day, which is about making data flows visible and automated decisions visible and understandable. Data feels cold and intangible, but it's about people at different scales. So what does this look like in IF's work? Making systems and data flows and automated decisions visible and understandable sounds complicated, but sometimes the outcomes that we end up with will look familiar to us as designers, like interaction pattern libraries. We curate the data patterns catalog to help product teams make better decisions about designing interactions for data sharing. The difference is that these patterns optimize for agency over data and transparency as opposed to seamless user experience. It's open and free to use, so please do have a look. But on top of that, we also work closely with clients to work out how to apply these patterns to products and services in context. This is an example of one of the patterns in the catalogue. It's called just-in-time consent. It describes asking someone for consent to use data in the moment that it's collected when someone's trying to complete a task. So, for example, giving an app permission to use location data as you're tagging your photos. When permission is asked in context, it's easier for somebody to understand what the data is needed for and weigh up the risks. But the trade-off is, with this pattern, you introduce friction, and using this too often may risk that people start to ignore it and click through. And while most of our work with clients is under NDA, it's really exciting to see that other parts of big tech companies are rolling out the sorts of patterns that we advocate for. Like this one, which was, I think, part of the most recent Android update. So I've just spoken about patterns. Some of our client work is also about prototyping. Here's an example that we mocked up to show what patterns might look like in the context of a brand. So it shows personalizing content marketing. Asking questions like this in context mean that people know what they're agreeing to when they're agreeing to it. And we think these sorts of decisions should happen within services, not buried in terms and conditions. So we know we need to design new ways of giving consent, but that also means designing friction. And the interface still needs to work and be delightful to use. So this is a genuinely hard question that we deal with in every single project. Another reason that we don't start with user needs is that we often hear things like this. People say that they don't care, but our work has shown that when you design consent well, people feel differently. We need to use what we know to design a new normal. This is a project we collaborated on with Kamuzi, who are a London-based design studio with lots of experience designing for young people. We were exploring what design interactions might look like for an automated chatbot in the context of a fictional mental health app. And here we were asking questions like, when is control needed? How do you design that in ways that are understandable and actionable? This interaction sits at the end of the experience. The person chooses what should happen to their data after they've shared it. This shows how small interactions that are easy to design and test can give people more agency over data. And our work has shown that people lack the language to talk about what's bothering them in an interface, because we don't have enough examples of what good looks like. So when we have tested interfaces that give people explicit control over data, they prefer it. We've also been designing interactions that acknowledge people's relationships and take into account the need for privacy and control. Who can see what data and where? This sketch shows how somebody could set up an app on behalf of a friend or relative, and it facilitates a conversation to set permissions together. We think it's important to look beyond the individual lens to designing for different kinds of relationships between people. So far, we've been talking about simple interactions around data sharing. This gets more complex with AI. We worked on a project with the London School of Economics to look at designing interactions for understanding automated decisions. We worked with Flock, who are an automated drone insurance company. And they give people insurance quotes based on real-time data. So here is an interaction that allows drone operators to play with the data inputs, so rural or urban, hopefully not anywhere near Gatwick Airport, and see how that relates to the risk, which is a bit hard to see, but in the bottom left-hand corner, and show how that relates directly to the policy. Another way of explaining automated decisions is by showing people the boundaries of how the automated system works. What has to change to allow them to get a different result? So this interaction is based on the idea of counterfactual explanations. It's important that end users understand how automated decisions are made so that they know how to get different results and can flag if something doesn't look right. This is more important as more of these automated decisions are in both private and public sector services. So this happened in Sweden earlier in the year. And it turns out we had already designed some ways of preventing these kinds of things from happening. This is important for both businesses and public sector organisations, especially from a reputational perspective. So this is the project that we worked on, exploring algorithmic transparency. It's in the context of a fictional benefit service. And here it shows someone has received a sanction. And they can clearly see that it was an automated decision. They have the ability to understand why that decision was made. Here they can see it was because they missed 3 appointments. At this stage, they have the option to appeal this decision if it doesn't look right. They can then share a code with an organisation who investigates on their behalf. This organisation could be someone like Citizens Advice. An employee working there could see with this data that a number of other automated sanctions have been given to people for the exact same reason. Having this kind of perspective allows them to see patterns like that and raise it with the organisation who runs that service. Businesses providing personalised services need oversight of how automated decisions impact customers at scale. Being able to spot and respond to issues quickly will result in a better customer experience and commercial success in the long term. All of these questions become even more important when there's no interface. How might we make the data flows in our cities understandable, accountable, and trusted? These issues are urgent and heading our way at increasing pace. For design to evolve to a place where we can meet these opportunities, individual user needs are not enough. Thank you. If you have any questions, please drop me a line.